Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Sharks Talk 916. I'm Chad, and with me, as usual, is Nolan. We're here to talk about sharks. It's Sharks Talk, so I guess that would be that makes sense. Brought to you by Sports Talk 916. If you care about other sports other than hockey, I don't know why you would, but if you do, and especially if you're in the Sacramento area, Bay Area. Also, and you want to hear some sports coverage, check out Sports Talk 916. They do, football, baseball, basketball, pretty much everything but hockey.
Even wrestling.
Yeah, they do wrestling talk if you're into wrestling. Wrestling. Not a huge wrestling fan myself. You guys can also check us out on Facebook at Sports Talk 916. Network, and we are on Twitter at Sharks Talk 916. We tweet during most games. I tweet during most games, I should say, as us. Nolan sometimes tweets as himself for some reason. And I'm not sure our commentary is worth anything, but you might as well check it out.
It's hopefully slightly less panicked and the earth is ending as most Sharks Twitter accounts are.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Not as much doomsday for us, but
I'd say we also don't go the other way though, right?
Right.
I'm also not ready to say everything's great now because Marleau's back. So we fixed everything, guys. Don't worry about it. I guess we're less hot and cold than everybody else. Anyway, so it's been an exciting couple weeks since the start of the season. We were just talking before we came on the air, but Nolan actually went and saw a game in Nashville where he lives now. I don't know what the area code is there, but
615.
Sports Talk 916/615. And I actually wanted to share some of the stuff you told me. So what was it like? I mean, I've only ever been to SAP Center personally. So what was it like being in Nashville?
Yeah, so this is the third road venue I've seen the Sharks at. My first road game was in Montreal, which Canadians are pretty nice for the most part, as expected. And then last year we went to a game in Vegas, which I would not encourage anyone at all to do that as a Sharks fan. Granted, it's Las Vegas, so you expect a lot of loud, obnoxious people. So that was a rough experience, but I really enjoyed going to the game in Nashville despite the results. No trash talking or anything like that. Really nice people. I don't know if it's the Southern hospitality or just the crowd in general. The crowd is definitely into the game. They're very loud. They have sort of choreographed chants after each goal that like to call out the opposing goaltender. But I enjoyed the experience. We went down to the glass during warm-up, got a couple of pucks from Hurdle and Goodrow, which was cool. We actually had seats 5 rows from the ice in the offensive zone the Sharks were attacking on twice. And in the first few rows there, you get access to sort of similar to SAP Center special concession stands underneath the arena. But the difference is it was entirely free food for those folks and quite a buffet to pick from. I mean, from desserts to pizza to nachos to enchiladas to fried chicken. I mean, everything your heart could desire.
What'd you pay? That was the other part that I loved.
I mean, the tickets I paid, I think, right around face value, which was like $130 each, I think. And when I looked before the game, they had gone down even more. So because I bought them a couple of months before the season started because I figured prices would go up. But now I know next time to just wait, although I've already got tickets for the one in December when they come back as well.
So I could almost fly to Nashville, pay for a ticket, and then including the free food, I'd probably about break even from going to San Jose and buying stuff.
Yeah, although it depends on the games. Like I've looked at the weekend games definitely cost a lot more, and both of the Sharks games this year are during the week, so I think that probably has a lot to do with it. And some of the more desirable opponents, the ticket prices definitely go up. So,
and then what was the best part? So to me, the best part, the coolest part was you got to be on TV, right? Or
a video with John Root, yeah. So before the game, during the warm-ups, there was a big group of Sharks fans, myself included, and he wanted to do a welcome back video for Marleau. So I was on the tail end of that, as we posted about on our Twitter account. The other really cool thing about Bridgestone Arena, it's right in the heart of downtown Nashville. If you've ever been to Nashville and on Broadway Street, they call it Nash Vegas for a reason. It's basically a mini strip, if you will. Loads of bars and restaurants, all with live music 24 hours a day, pretty much. And you walk out of the arena and you're right in the heart of Broadway. So, I mean, if you're into drinking and partying, I mean, I couldn't think of a better place to see a hockey game, as an all-around experience. So I thoroughly enjoyed it despite us not faring too well that night. So,
yeah, good. So that brings us this installment of what hockey's like in another arena. So let's jump into actually talking about the Sharks a little bit. It's only a couple weeks into the season, so all of this discussion obviously would come with a grain of salt of who knows what the next, 80 some odd games, or I guess 70 some odd games brings us. But we're going to talk about, I think, a bit of a rough start. I don't think anybody really would argue with that for the Sharks. And then the big news, the return of Patrick Marleau. The news we didn't think was going to happen. You and I, neither of us thought it was a good deal necessarily earlier. But
I had a suspicion this was going to unfold this way if things turned out the way it did. I didn't think it happened this quickly, but in some ways it doesn't surprise me because I kind of figured the young guys would not fill the spots, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the early struggles, the Marleau's return, talk a little about some goaltending, defensive pairings, and then a look ahead of what's coming up. So let's start off just early season struggles. Let's jump right into it. So 0-4 start, not a great, actually a terrible start. And they weren't even close games, right? No. The first 4 games, the Sharks showed almost no signs of life, in my opinion. Those 2 blowouts by Vegas is a tough way to start your season. What did you see? I guess what were the biggest things you saw that were problems? And were there any things you saw early on that you thought, oh, there's a spark of something good?
Well, I mean, the goal scoring was a huge issue. I mean, the first 3 games, they had 1 goal per game. Then they finally got 2 goals against Nashville, and 2 goals felt like a miracle. So the goal scoring right away was an issue, which obviously Kane's suspension didn't help with those matters, but I think that just kind of exposed what one of their big challenges is going to be this year is scoring, which we kind of telegraphed ahead of time, and that didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that, losing Pavelski, Nyquist, and Donskoy was going to have a negative impact on, their goal scoring. So that stood out. And then just the continuation of the problems we saw last year, a combination of poor goaltending and, too many odd man rushes, and not even necessarily the odd man rushes, just defensive breakdowns in general, and just giving up too many grade A chances. And because of that, the numbers for Jones and even Dell, who played fairly well in the Chicago game, their numbers still look pretty awful.
Yeah. I didn't see many good signs in those especially those first 3 games. I tweeted on the 4th game that I felt like they looked better than they did the first 3 games, and I got a lot of flack for it because, of course, the score didn't look any better. But I do think they started to turn a corner on that game. You started to see a little more offense, a little more speed. Good 10 minutes of play, but unfortunately, it's a 60-minute game. You can't play just 10 minutes of good play.
Yeah, no, they had a good 10, 15 minutes in that game where they were only down 1 and had a chance to tie it up, and then Nashville got 2 odd man rushes and popped both of them in the net. So, and that's where, I mean, Jones or Dell, who's ever playing, Jones in that case, need to step up and give the team a chance to recover. I mean, sure, you don't want to give up those chances, but they're going to happen, and you've got to get a big save at some point.
Yeah, and we're staying on the first 4 games. Like, Jones was a heartbreaker to me, right? He was back to being last season Jones, where early in the game he lets in a soft goal or 2 soft goals and puts, we end up behind. But then later in the game he's making miraculous saves to keep us in the game. And it's like, I'd rather just go the first period without any soft goals, right, than have him do gymnastics in the second and third, to keep us going. So we get through those 4 games, only 4 injuries in 4 games, right?
Thankfully, it wasn't the key players, right? I mean, so I think Prout was the first one to go down, and then Heed was an interesting situation because for a while, myself and other Sharks fans thought, okay, why is DeBoer playing Middleton and then Carrick over Heed? And then we find out later that Heed is hurt. I don't know why that was never mentioned up until that point. I think that was a failure by the Sharks media guys to not ask about that sooner. But because everyone was wondering, okay, why in the world is Middleton or Carrick playing over Heed? Like, what does Heed have to do to get in the lineup? And it turns out he was injured as well. And then
we almost thought it was a Ryan situation, right? Where maybe Pete just didn't like him and wasn't playing him, but
I think there's still some question about that. We'll see as everyone gets healthy. But and the Middleton goes down against Vegas as well. So Prout goes down the first game, Middleton the second game, and then Sorensen I think went down the third game if I remember right. Which sounds like he might be back tomorrow, possibly.
Yeah, he was skating on the line today, and it wasn't in a fancy colored jersey. So, good chance he's back in the lineup tomorrow night, which will be good. Just 4 injuries. I mean, if there's one thing that Sharks needed starting out was 4 injuries to add to their. It's funny because we're coming in, we're like, well, you've got so many defensemen. I mean, what are you going to do? Well, we figured it out. They're going to go
through that depth real quick.
Yeah. And I think Sorensen's one of the big ones because that leads to kind of Marleau's return, in my opinion. Sorensen going down, and then the poor play by the youngsters. Someone said, "Can't we sign anybody under 40?" I mean, we can, but then apparently they can't play, so we have to put them back and sign old men to come in and help shape up the team.
Yeah, and before we get into the Marleau stuff, I mean, to your point about Sorensen, I mean, on a normal roster, he's not a big loss. On this team, it is a bigger loss because they're already starving for top 9 forwards, and he's not a great top 9 forward by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a heck of a lot better than, watching Melchor Carlson or Goodrow on the third line, or Radil, your personal favorite so far this season, who hasn't earned a single shift from what either of us have seen. But
I don't know if you saw my tweet today, but he's got to be like Pete DeBoer's nephew or something. I don't know why he's still getting spots in the lineup.
I mean, I don't know if he's got built up kudos from last year because he did have some good games last year, but certainly if you base it off this year, he's shown nothing at all. So.
Yeah, it's not usual to me. It's not usual for Pete to take the. Oh, I know you've got more in you. We'll just let you play it out. He's usually more of the send you down. You figure it out. Come back.
Yeah,
and play.
For the guys who don't have a ton of NHL experience, which he doesn't. It's not like you're talking about Joe Thornton or Marleau.
So I think power play was a big thing too. You mentioned that it looked awful. I mean, it wasn't surprising to me because our power play didn't look great last year, especially the end of the year. But that's the one thing that I think really turned around too in the last couple games is seeing that power play actually score and do something other than go into the zone and turn over the puck. And
they gave up 3 shorthanded goals to Vegas in 2 games and almost gave up a 4th, I believe, to Nashville or Chicago. I don't remember who, but
we were a -3. After 4 games, I think we were -3. Maybe it was. I think we got a power play goal, so we were like a -2 on the power play, which is pretty terrible.
Yeah, and they finally split up Burns and Carlson on the power play. At the start of the year, they were mostly on the ice together, and now they're separated. They even tried a few different alignments. They had Burns on the far wall in the Ovechkin spot, which on paper sounds like a great idea, but he's just not comfortable in that spot. For as good as a wrist shot as he has, he's not that great at one-timers. It's just not his specialty. So that was a short-lived experiment, which a lot of Sharks fans have clamored for a long time, myself included. But yes, the power play looks much better the last couple of games. The big thing in this most recent game against Calgary was 2 and under, right? They finally held an opponent to under 2 goals, just the one goal.
Two or fewer. Yeah, we're back to #2 or fewer.
Yeah, and I don't think Jones was spectacular against Calgary, but the point is he didn't have to be because the defensive effort was much better.
He was solid though. I mean,
Yeah.
he didn't give up any soft goals. He made saves when he needed to make them. Uh, Definitely looked a lot better. So we were talking the first 4 games. Again, we're kind of working in the turnaround in this conversation because you can't really compare them. You can't really talk about them without comparing. But you talk about Hertl, Meyer, and Carlson looked just. I don't think Hertl looked bad. He just wasn't scoring. He wasn't producing anything, right? Meyer, the same way.
I mean, nobody was producing. They had 1 goal the first 3 games, So.
And those are the guys you kind of wanted to see step up. I tweeted about that after Meyer scored. I was like, okay, now we just need one from Hertl, the last game, and then we got one. So they're looking better. They're seeming to get their legs and get used to this offense again. Carlson had a ton of shots during the power play last game. He's still got 3 assists, I think.
And he's been fine offensively. My issue with him has just been his defensive effort. I mean, especially if you watch him around the net. I know he's not a physical player. That's not his style. I mean, he's not Dylan or even Burns. He's not a big guy. I get that. But as a defenseman, you have to be physical in front of the net. I mean, you can't just reach with your stick. If a guy's in front of the net next to your goalie going after a rebound, you got to push him out of the way or at least attempt to use your body. And I haven't seen any of that from him at all.
Well, I think that's one guy you don't have mentioned here that I would bring up with that too is Vlasic. I mean, his defensive play has been terrible. He's turned over the puck. He just last game, he had the puck, had plenty of time. He could have taken a moment to decide what he wanted to do, but instead he just quick chips it right to the opponent in the D zone. I mean, the turnovers in the neutral zone are terrible. I don't know if he's just being lazy. I don't know if he wants to be traded. I don't know what his thing is, but he's not playing the way you expect Vlasic to play.
Yeah, that's been the story with him for like the last, year and a half, 2 years now, other than the playoffs. The playoffs, he tends to show up. But, I mean, it's kind of a continuation of, last year, just like the entire D Corps as a whole in terms of the chances that they're giving up. So it's not a good sign that those trends have carried on for this long. Granted, we are only 6 games into the season now, and the last 2 have been much better. And that I kind of got not a laugh out of it because I was getting a little worried as well and a little concerned. But I mean, after the first 4 games, the amount of panic and sheer "oh my god, this team sucks" just kind of always kills me. Like,
I mean, Pete
it's a long season.
Yeah, we're going to fire DeBoer. We're going to, Jones is the worst. Erik Karlsson is overpaid. Shouldn't have traded Pavelski. I mean, just every single.
There may be just all of those to an extent, but yeah,
sure. But it was full on giving up on the season. We've ruined everything mode after 4 games, and then you bring in the White Knight. You make a call, which I think you and I said, or talking to each other at least, and on Twitter after 3 games. And then after the 4th, especially, but the 3rd game, we're like, Marleau's phone's probably ringing at this point, right? Or
semi-joking, but apparently we were correct. So
yeah, and the news came out quick. I mean, it went from they're talking to Marleau's re-signed, which I don't think is a shock to anybody because he said he wanted to play for the Sharks, and we had said at the last season and going into this season, we'd said if you can get him for the minimum.
Right.
I mean, he's a hard guy to pass up for $700,000, right? And so, I mean, the deal happened, and it happened quick. My guess is it was literally Marleau was just waiting on the Sharks to call him, and I'm wondering how much he's watching the games, going, "Come on, guys, come on." Guys. He's like looking at his phone as it's happening.
Yeah, I don't think he had any interest in going anywhere else until it was 100%. Locked down that there was 0 chance of coming back here, which who knows what. I mean, Doug obviously told him, hey, we want to give the young guys a chance, blah, blah, blah. But who knows how much Doug left that door open during the offseason, saying, hey, let's see how things go. And if we struggle, we'll bring in, or if it was just a complete, 180-degree turn and changed his mind after seeing how the season began.
And to people who were opposed to it, because there are some people who were like, really, we're signing Marleau again? But I'm like, look, for the price, you get a guy who's still one of the fastest skaters on the team. And they were even saying he skated with the team during the
training camp,
during training camp, and he was still one of the best skaters out there then. If he adds any kind of stability, he's worth the $700,000. I mean, it's not worst case scenario. You bench him later on and you play other guys,
or cut him. That would be hard to do just because of his loyalty. Or, well, some people would even debate his loyalty after leaving to Toronto, but I don't think they would cut him unless he was really, really bad because of the history. But to your point as well, I mean, what other options do they have at this point? Certainly you can go back to the offseason and make a valid argument that Doug exaggerated how much these young guys were rated and should have added another forward at that point. That you can definitely argue, but that's in the past. At this point, there's no other free agents available that are attractive. Certainly you can try the trade route, but you're going to be subtracting from an already thin roster. And it's not a lot of teams want to make trades this time of year because they're still evaluating what they have internally. So their options were basically limited, I think, to Marleau and, maybe calling up different young guys, or Vladimir and Nemestikov of the Rangers did get traded to Ottawa as well. That was more of a salary dump, which the Sharks don't have the cap room for that. But
exactly.
Trades are very limited this time of year. So their options.
You asked the question, so is this a referendum on the young guys failing, or is this just a result of injuries? I think it's a good question. I think to me, it's a combination of the two. I mean, I think the injuries pushed them over the line. I think it was clear 2 games in that your young guys aren't cutting it. And then you're going to go to the blender, right, and send guys down, bring guys up, move guys around. I'm actually really surprised Brodzinski is the one that they put on waivers and signed. I felt like he deserved a better shot than he got, especially with the way like Radio's playing.
Yeah, I'm glad he cleared waivers at least, so he's still in the organization. But I didn't agree with that move at all. I thought Radio should have been the one to go as well.
And I don't know if how much of that move is just they knew he'd clear waivers, so it was there's no risk. There's no risk to them in doing it, right?
Yeah.
But I think a big part is a referendum on the young guys, and then just Sorensen going down. I think that made them realize, hey, if we have any injuries this season, we don't have anybody to fill those spots. Really, we don't. If we have one decent player injured,
right,
one goal scorer goes down, we're screwed. I mean, if God forbid Couture or Hurdle goes down, what are you going to do? Who's going to play in those spots?
Yeah, I mean, it was a perfect storm of events, right? I mean, Kane gets suspended, Sorensen's hurt. They have other injuries on the blue line, which naturally you would look at and say, okay, how do blue line injuries affect the forward corps? But it also means that more young players are in the lineup. You have less veterans in the lineup, and the roster was looking very AHL full at that point. I mean, it was almost split down the middle between very inexperienced guys and more veterans. So,
well, and I think if you want to understand how the blue line matters, I mean, this is off topic for a second, but look at how Pavelski's doing on Dallas. That's how the blue line affects your forwards. We're a blue line fed team. That's how many shots do Burns and Carlson and them take from the blue line to start our offense off. If you've got young guys who aren't used to that or who aren't great goal shooters, the more of that you have, the less opportunity the forwards are getting with the way that our offense currently runs. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah. And I don't know, part of me, I don't know if you watched the Doug Wilson interview when they announced the signing of Marleau. A large part of me watched that kind of rolling my eyes and laughing, and Doug trying to basically give the politically correct answers that, we wanted to give our young guys a chance. We had injuries and suspension, when in reality, they probably should have made this move from day one, in my opinion. But at least they had the, ownership to realize, okay, you know what, we need some help, and I'm not going to, just stick by my original decision, and, I'm willing to, reconsider now. So,
well, you never know how much of that is DeBoer and how much of that is Wilson, and what the the trade-off is there. Who's telling who that we want to play these young guys that we've signed, and versus go out and sign somebody else.
Yeah, I don't think DeBoer was nearly as much on board as Doug is, but I mean, ultimately, Doug decides the roster, right, and DeBoer, decides the lineup. I guess is the way to look at it.
But like you said, after those 4 games, there was no one. I can't imagine anyone in the office who's not like, "Hey, we might as well bring Marleau back and give him a shot." And then his return is, spectacular, right? Almost storybook. Like if he'd gotten that hat trick, I think, especially if it had been like the game winner was a hat trick.
How does DeBoer not put him out there with the empty net? I mean, I get it. They haven't won a game. Maybe he's a little rusty. You want guys out there that have played a few games, but come on.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he himself was kind of saying people were giving him a bunch of credit for how well he was playing and, with no training camp and everything. But I got the feeling from Marleau that he was pretty worn out there, that not having training camp and not playing recently was wearing on him. So,
well, and I wonder too if the reason they put him in the lineup right away is because of the game streak that he has. If he had missed that game, then his 789 straight games or whatever it was would have been broken. I wonder how much of that played into them injecting him right away. I mean, obviously they need the help right away, so that probably is part of it too. But if he didn't have that streak, I'm curious if they would have, had him go through a couple of practices before throwing him in there.
I mean, I don't think they win that game without him.
Honestly. No, they don't. I mean, so it worked out, but I'm just wondering if that was really the reason. But he made them look like geniuses for sure. And like you said, I mean, what a story. But I've never been a big Marleau fan, but I mean, that situation still, how can you not love that? A guy comes in, no training camp, all the history, and scores 2 goals his first game. Then they have the home game Sunday night, play the tribute video, and he's clearly shedding a tear or 2 on the bench. So it's just a cool story.
My wife has watched the last 2 games, so that it's exciting now that Patrick Marleau's back.
And I think it gave the guys a boost, right? So it's helped pick up the locker room. I'm curious to see. I mean, he looked great in the first game. I didn't think he looked that great on Sunday against Calgary. He was sort of okay. I don't know if he's going to be a huge impact on the score sheet the rest of the season. I think that his impact may die down a little bit now that the sort of excitement as it wears off, from his return. But the one thing that I think he does bring that's critical is, and Logan kind of talked about it, is like Logan knows where he's going to be on the ice, right? He's played with them for years on end before he went to Toronto. And just that familiarity is huge compared to playing with rookies that don't really know where to go yet. And just the familiarity is huge, even if he doesn't have the same skill set that he used to have.
And that's my other question. Do you think so? If he starts dropping off some, like let's say he doesn't score for a while, do you think he's moved down? Because he's comfortable with Couture, obviously. I think he'd be comfortable with Jumbo. I don't know if he'd be a good fit for that second line. I think that he's either a first or third liner. With DeBoer, I mean the lines change every other shift, I feel like, a lot of times. So as soon as they start losing again, I'm sure he won't hesitate to change it around. I wouldn't be surprised if Marleau plays on all 4 lines before the year is over at one point or another. But yeah, I like during games when you and I are texting each other, like, who's on this line right now? Like, what 3 people are out there?
Yeah. And he's always got the line blender going, so to speak. But yeah, no, I mean, so far, Doug looks like a genius, although you could argue he should have done this sooner or done it in the offseason. But I mean, so far they're 2-0 with Marleau, so maybe we'll go 76-0 or whatever it is the rest of the way.
Undefeated with Marleau. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. No
problem. All right, so let's drop back a little further and then talk about goalies. So I thought it was an interesting choice to put Dell in to Nashville. I was actually saying I thought we'd see him again.
Or he played versus Chicago.
Chicago. Sorry, you're right.
Against Anaheim the 3rd game and then Chicago the 5th game.
So after seeing him in Chicago, I thought we might see him in Nashville. I actually thought he played really solid in Chicago. I mean, the defense on both sides was terrible.
You thought he'd play versus Calgary Sunday.
Versus Calgary, yeah.
I remember us arguing about that.
I feel confused. Yeah, so but I thought he played well. Actually, I thought it was one of the better games we've seen from him in a while. I know the score was, there's 4 goals against or whatever, but when you look at them, it was our defensemen giving up really high quality shots against Dell or standing there while the other team passes back and forth 5 times for some reason. What do you think? I mean, both Jones and Dell, because I'd say the last game of Jones, you saw a marked improvement from his previous games. How comfortable are you at this point with them?
Well, kind of going back to the decision Sunday of who to play after, I mean, by all accounts, Dell had a good game against Chicago. Sure, you can look at the box score, he gave up 4 goals, you think, okay, he wasn't that great, but if you watch the game, he made a lot of big saves, and DeBoer was pretty complimentary of him after the game. In your perspective, what's that?
I felt like at the end, especially like that last.
He made a save like 10 seconds left, I think, to save the game. In your perspective was, hey, he's quote unquote, I guess, the hot hand. Why not throw him out there again? He just played a great game, so on and so forth. And my perspective was, and I'll kind of expand on it. At this point, Jones is a starter. I don't see any scenario on earth where Dell ever takes the starting job unless Jones gets injured. Just because I don't think Dell is an NHL starter. So from my perspective, they have to give Jones every opportunity in the face of the planet to try and rebound, and they have to show confidence in him like they did during the Vegas series that ended up working out. If there was a more open competition, then I would, be more willing to give Dell more consistent time. But at this point, to me, they're stuck with Jones. He's going to be the number 1 unless something crazy happens. So you got to be careful not to, I guess, break his confidence. I don't know how fragile his mindset is, but I can understand going right back to, the guy that they're going to have to count on essentially.
I mean, we saw them show faith in him in the playoffs last season, and that seemed to pay off, right? I mean, he had a moment where I guess everybody on Twitter or Facebook, everybody I talked to was saying, you can't play him the next game.
Yeah,
there's no way.
Yeah.
You've got to put Dell in. And, they don't. They roll with putting Jones back in the net, and he turns around his game, honestly, and turns around their playoffs at that point. So he definitely seems to respond well to that positive reinforcement, right? That we believe we're putting you in. I actually think you're going to see Dell play more. I think you might even see Dell play against Carolina. I think that what Pete might do is go to hey, we're going to go back and forth and figure out who's going to be the best goalie for us at this point. And I also think it's a way to maybe, if Dell's going to have some good games, maybe you can sell him.
That's true,
you couldn't before, right? If you can get him 3 or 4 good-looking games early on in the season, he may be someone you can trade bait later on.
Although, granted, if he plays well, they're probably going to want to keep him, given Jones is not exactly a sure thing at this point.
That becomes the dilemma, right? If he plays too well, then you're like, well, we don't want to get rid of Dell.
Yeah.
But that's when he's of the most value. And you're not keeping him next. I can't imagine you're keeping him.
No, I'd be very surprised if he's back after this year. But yeah, I mean, Kerr's even wrote an article basically summarizing what you just said, that DeBoer does plan to give Dell more shots this year. And I think DeBoer told him, hey, I wanted to play you more last year and I want to play you more this year, but you got to give me a reason to do so. So he kind of challenged Dell, and I do think he will play more games than he did last year, assuming that he's not a disaster when he's out there. But I just don't see a situation where, Dell plays more than 2 games in a row, maybe 3 at most. He's never going to get an opportunity to be the starter unless an injury happens.
I think you'll see more just Jones getting longer breaks than he would normally get, right? So it won't just be in back-to-back scenarios that you'll see Dell play. You'll see him brought in every couple games or every few
maybe
games.
Once a week or once every 2 weeks or so.
And I did not read the Kerr's article, so
I haven't read it. I just saw the summary of it.
No, I read one of his other articles, but I did not plagiarize that article.
You mean he didn't plagiarize us for once? That's what you mean to say.
Yeah, he said it first this time, for the first time ever. So let's talk about Jones for a minute. you have in here, how long do you stick by Jones? I don't think you have a choice because he's your starter for better or worse. You can't sell him. You can't get rid of him. You're kind of stuck with him. And what are you looking for from him? To me, it's a pretty simple answer. Like, I want to see him string 3 games together. Like, I want to see 3 solid games in a row from Jones before I'm willing to be back on the Jones train of like, hey, he's turned it around and he's gonna be the Jones of old. I feel like I'm in the middle. I'm not either way on him. I don't think, he's the worst goalie in the world. He's to blame for all of our problems, because that's clearly not true. But I think that he is to blame for some of our issues, and I'm going to need to see a few games in a row from him to feel comfortable with him again.
Yeah, I just want to see him make that big save that I was talking about earlier. They're going to give up odd man rushes, 2-on-1s, 3-on-1s, and I just want to see more consistency in him making that big stop, and then also avoiding the softies or the complete gift goals that he has a tendency to give up, which those are going to happen occasionally, but I just want to see more consistency in those 2 areas. Cody had a question about, is there a goalie out there that you think Doug will target? I think it's too early right now to say that, because mostly every team, not quite every team, goes into the season expecting to compete. So no one's really available right now per se. I mean, as we get closer to the trade deadline and teams have a better idea of whether they have a shot to compete or not, then we'll have a better idea of who's really available. If you go look at what goalies are set to be free agents at the end of this year, that would give you a hint. I haven't taken a look at that list myself, but that would probably be the place to start as far as that goes.
Yeah, I think that's the tough part. I mean, you're two tough things there. One is that you've got too much money tied up in Jones that I don't think anyone's buying on Jones. So what do you do with him if you go try to get another goalie? I mean,
basically you'd be looking at a better backup than Dell that you hope can come in and steal time, kind of like James Reimer did, 5-6 years ago, that they acquired at the trade deadline. He played quite a bit going into the playoffs. He didn't play at all in the playoffs, but he helped out a lot down the stretch.
Yeah, I really would have loved a crack at Bobrovsky last season, but I don't think that's I'm not sure it was ever an option anyways.
No, and I mean, I would never pay $10 million a year for a goalie. That's just ridiculous money for a goalie, in my opinion, because goalies, as we've talked about before, I mean, not many of them are good for a long time. I mean, guys will be kind of a flash in the pan for 2 or 3 years. I mean, you look at Jonathan Quick, he's one of the worst goalies in the NHL now. After, according to most experts, being one of the best goalies in the NHL for, 4 or 5 years. So it's just so inconsistent year to year that it's hard to, really buy into goalies long term. Steve has a question. Is Jones not up to par, or is it the same thing like with Dell the other game? Steve's basically saying he thinks that both goalies have been sort of left out to dry by the defense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's no denying that. The thing for me is not it's like when you watch, it's like watching a 5-2 loss and saying, hey, we played better than we've played the previous games, right? I'm not looking at the score to determine that. I'm looking at how people are playing. With Jones, it's not that I'm ignoring the fact that the defense is playing crappy in front of him. It's the fact that he lets goals in when they aren't playing crappy in front of him. He lets goals in that he should, like, every goalie should make that save, basically. Or, 99.9% of the time, a goalie should make the save, and he doesn't. When I saw Dell's goals the other night, I never felt like one of those goals was an easy save for Dell. They were all 2-on-1s or things where he didn't have time to adjust because of what was happening on the ice.
Yeah.
So my answer is that I think Jones isn't up to par to be an elite starting goalie. But it doesn't help that our defense hangs him out to dry constantly. So that one goal that would normally be no big deal, or 2 goals that would normally be no big deal, become a huge deal because then we give up 3 more because of terrible defense.
Yeah, as always, I think there's a bit of truth on both sides there. I mean, certainly our defensive awareness or lack thereof has been a huge issue. I mean, in the way I would sort of speak to that, if you go back to not last year, but the year before, Dell had a fantastic year. Jones, I wouldn't say he had a great year, but he was a hell of a lot better than he was last year, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that both goalies had a terrible year last year. I mean, that speaks to the defense. If one of them just had a bad year, then I think you could argue more, that it's individual performance. But I certainly think the team defense was a huge factor because they both had bad years last year, and it's sort of carried into the start of this year. But to Chad's point, I don't think Jones is an elite NHL goalie, even if they play better defense in front of him. I think he's a league average starting goalie, maybe slightly above on a good day. But I don't think he's an elite goalie. In the playoffs, you could argue at times he has been an elite goalie, but in the regular season, he's never been a great goalie. The other point I'll make is don't look at the save percentage stats for Sharks goalies. They don't give up a lot of shots on goal. So if they give up 3 or 4 goals, their save percentage is always horrendous, just because the Sharks typically are one of the league leaders in fewest shots allowed, which you would think that should mean less goals allowed. But as we've talked about ad nauseum now, I mean, it's the quality of those shots more so than the quantity.
I don't know. I agree with you. I don't necessarily compare them to the rest of the league, but I do think you compare them to themselves year over year.
Yeah.
And I mean, Jones is below 90 now. In fact, they're both below 90 now. You go back 2 seasons and he was 91, I think, or 92. Like there is definitely something there. There's a difference to me between the way Jones plays now and the way he played before.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely declined. I don't know how much of it is him and how much of it's the defense. Like I said, I think it's a combination.
My argument is it's both. Yeah, it's both. I think and without the scoring that we had last year, we can't have either of those, right? Like we can't have him letting in soft goals, and we can't have a defense that collapses in front of him.
Well, and if anything, I mean the lackluster defense has exposed him as perhaps what he really is, which is an average goalie, or slightly above, slightly less, depending on perspective.
And I like Jones. I just want to see Jones bought again, right? I want to see the guy who is always in the right position to make a save, regardless of what's going on with the defense necessarily. And I feel like he's not always there. The things that he would have been in position previously. I mean, we both know you shoot over his shoulder, and you've got a good chance of the goal going in.
And I hope he watched. I would hope that he's watched plenty of film this offseason and saw where felt like 80% of the goals went against him. I mean, you have to think he's aware that that's a hole in his game, right? I would hope.
I've heard commentators mention it, right? Like, I mean, I've heard it's not just us. I've heard numerous people talk about how, like, if you go high, you're going to go over Jones's shoulder. And
right.
That's a problem. It's a weak spot with the goalie that has nothing to do necessarily with the defense in front of him. So,
yeah. In fact, I mean, if you go back to the goal that LeBanc scored against Calgary on Sunday, I think Jamie or Brett, whoever was in the booth, talked about it, that goalie went down way too early, opened the top of the net, and LeBanc took advantage of it. So it's not just a Jones thing in general.
Yeah, sure. So that's a good transition. Let's talk defense. So Heed's back. Šimek, from what it sounds like, is around the corner. They're not saying it's a setback in his recovery, but
right.
It's going slower than anticipated, I guess.
Yeah.
But let's say 2-3 weeks, Šimek is back in. They're saying he could make a road trip, but I don't think he will.
I agree. I'd say 2 weeks is about right, probably.
Prout coming back. We're going to have a weird problem of too many defensemen.
Assuming no one else goes down before then, knock on wood.
Certainly. Assuming no one else goes down. You'll have 8 players for at most 7 spots, and I don't think we carry 7 defensemen. I think we carry 6 defensemen. But
I think they'll carry 7. I mean, because that seems to be what they've done the last few years. But
you don't play 7. I mean,
no, but I mean just on the active roster.
Yeah.
But I definitely don't see them carrying 8. That's for sure. And no, you're right. I don't see them playing 7 defensemen on any given night. I don't think DeBoer's ever done that. McClellan did it fairly often, but DeBoer is not a big fan of that.
So, given all 8 options, what are your 3 dream defensive pairs, I guess, out of those 3 or out of those 8 people?
Well, I mean, before we get to the pairs, as far as who I would cut, personally, I would cut Prout, but I don't think that's going to happen. I'm really not sure what they're going to do. I'm guessing they'll send Ferraro down. Personally, I wouldn't. I'd rather see Prout cut, but my guess is Ferraro probably goes down. As far as the pairs go, I don't know. I'm willing to give Vlasic and Carlson another shot together. I want to try that one more time and see how it works. It was terrible last year, but if that doesn't work, then okay, stick with Dylan and Carlson. If you stick with Dylan and Carlson, then I think you go Vlasic, Heed, and then Burns and Šimek, which I think is probably what you want to do as well. But if you do try out Vlasic, Carlson, then Burns, Šimek, Dylan, Heed would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what I said last year, and what I say all the time is I'd rather have 2 pairs I know work well together than keep mixing it up and hoping to get, I don't know what he's looking for, 3 extraordinary pairs. So I think you put Šimek with Burns. I don't think anyone argues with that. Well, that's not true. There are people who think that Vlasic and Burns should stay together forever. I think that's a ridiculous idea.
If that's the case, they haven't watched the first 6 games.
Yeah, I get that it worked in the last playoffs, but just like Jones was great in the last playoffs, and just like, a lot of things happen during playoffs that don't happen during regular season.
Well, and if we had playoff Vlasic in the lineup, then maybe that's a different story.
Sure. So I think you put Burns with Šimek because, to me, that's when Burns has looked his best. That's the best pairing I've seen with Burns. Now, we don't know what Šimek's going to look like coming back because it's been a rough road, but I think you try that out. One, because he's comfortable with that. He knows how to play with Burns, so it makes it easier on him coming back. And 2, because he stays home and pays attention while Burns goes off and is Brent Burns. I think
Cody made a comment, which I hope is in jest. Some people, I think, still seriously want to propose that Burns going back to forward. I think Cody's just joking. Correct me if I'm wrong, Cody, but yeah, that one always made me laugh. As soon as Burns won a Norris Trophy, that conversation was long gone. And he's as good as he was on the wing for the few months that he played there. I mean, he still has way more of an impact on the team defensively than – keep in mind, I mean, if even a good forward is only going to play, 18, 20 minutes a night, whereas on D he can play, 25, 26 minutes a night.
Yeah, I think his shot is perfectly suited for where he shoots from. Like it's that blue line, even though it's not a slap shot, right? That wrister he does is perfect for where he's at. Yeah. And he plays forward anytime he wants anyways, because he just jumps up if he feels like he should jump up. If he's got the puck, he's going to go to the net. So I'm not too worried about it. Cody is joking.
I figured Cody. I just wanted to clarify because there are a few crazy people out there that still think that's legitimate.
So Burns, Šimek, I'm going to put Dylan back with EK65 because, again, that's the best pairing I saw with Carlson. And honestly, at this point, I might bench Vlasic for a few games. He's in your 7. I think.
So we talked about that last year, right? When he was going through the same struggles. If it didn't happen then, I don't see it happening now. But
I think he's in your 7. And so I think the reality is it's Vlasic, Heed. Although I wouldn't mind seeing Heed Ferraro stay out there and let Vlasic take a breather and say, hey, if he's not producing any better defense than they are, there's no reason to have him on the ice because he's not providing you offense. So what's your argument for keeping Vlasic on the ice if he's being crappy on defense and he provides 0 offense?
The argument is his contract and his legacy. I mean, that's the reality of it. I mean, the board doesn't have the balls in him to bench a veteran player. That's just how he is.
I know. And
if it was John Tortorella, it probably would have happened by now.
Sure. Yeah. And you know me, Vlasic 2 years ago and before was my favorite player on the Sharks. I mean, he is my idea of what a defenseman should be. A defenseman should be a defenseman, not a forward that shoots a ton. I don't like Burns being called a defenseman only because I barely
call it. 2 separate awards at the end of the year.
Yeah. I think Vlasic, if they had a defensive defenseman award, Vlasic would have won it multiple years at this point. But he certainly wouldn't have earned it last year, and so far is nowhere near it this year. So
No, and I am puzzled. I mean, I don't know what has caused that in his game. I mean, some people will blame it on age, but I mean, he was never a great skater to begin with, and skating isn't an issue right now. It's just, I want to say, effort and focus more than anything.
Yeah, he always played a mental game more than a physical speed
Right.
game. I mean, for
Yeah,
him
he's
it was
never been a
always
great skater. Yeah.
no. It's about knowing what angles to take. It's about handling the puck properly, getting it out of the zone correctly. Like that's where he's always been good. So yeah, I'm with you. I don't buy it as an age issue. It's a mental issue. Either he's checked out or something's going on in his life that's causing him to not focus on hockey.
One
I
of
don't
his
know.
puppies has cancer. No, I'm just kidding. That's
I
terrible.
mean, you don't. I mean, that's why I don't judge, right?
Get him a new
Because you,
dog.
like I don't jump to conclusions because you never know when it's something like that.
Yeah, I mean, look, we didn't know. Like, remember, we didn't even talk about this. You know, Carlson gets healthy scratch the first game of the season, and people are panicking. Oh, he doesn't want to be a Shark. Oh, he's injured again. And sure enough, he had a child, and we all looked like
Why are
idiots.
we paying him, $13 million to
Right.
not play games? And like, oh, his
Which
wife had a baby.
I'll admit, I was panicking too because of the history there, but I was glad to be proven stupid. So,
Yeah, but I think those are the pairings you see. I think you see Shimmick. Hopefully, that's ones I'd like to see. I guess we're not talking about what I think DeBoer's going to actually do, but I think he's going to keep 44-88 together for some asinine reason.
I think once Shimmick proves he's healthy, they'll put Burns back with Shimmick just because it worked so well. And I think they will probably try Carlson and Vlasic again, at least temporarily, and see how it goes. But we'll see. The one other thing I wanted to touch on, Steve made a comment about Prout has been a disaster. I got in an argument about this with a few people on Twitter. Like, let me just be clear. Dalton Prout has played one game as the San Jose Shark. Did he make a big mistake in that one game? Yes. Although I would argue Vlasic made a horrible pass to him that caused that fuck up.
Again,
But
if we're going to talk about making
right.
big mistakes,
and I get it. Prout has never been a regular defenseman on any team he's played. He's been in the league a few years, but I also want to turn around and ask those some people, okay, how many games have you watched Dalton Prout play in your life? The answer is probably 0. So you're going based off his career stats and reports from other people, and we've seen him play one game this year. So while I agree he's probably not a great option, I'll give him more than one game before I, throw him out the window quite yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is, and I don't know why we like these guys so much, but he's the defensive version of
Haley.
Haley, right? Like Prout's there, so you can bring him in against Vegas or bring him in against a team that's going to be really physical, and he can be an enforcer-like player in there. They don't generally play well. You don't necessarily want them in there all the time. But I think I agree.
I think he can be slightly more than that, but we'll see. My caution is just let's give him more than one game, guys, before we assume that he's an awful hockey player. I mean, I get that's his reputation. That's what he's known as. But let's be honest, none of us watch other teams play on a regular basis. So, I mean, unless you're talking about guys that get a lot of media coverage, I mean, we don't know personally.
I mean, that was my thing with Brodzinski too, right? Is like you play him on the fourth line a little bit, and then you're like, this guy's no good.
Yeah, he never got a chance to me, in my opinion. I mean, the first 2 games of preseason, he was their best player.
But what do you have to lose? I mean, what is?
I think he played like half a game with Thornton in the regular season, if that. I think he just got fourth line. I don't think he ever played with Thornton in the regular season.
So. What's Melchor Carlson or Radil bringing to the table that you can't?
I mean, Melchor they love because of penalty kill, but that doesn't mean he has to be on the third line. You can put him in the lineup, but he doesn't need to be in the third line. And sure, when Melchor first signed with the Sharks, he actually did show some potential. He was like a 15-goal scorer, and he actually looked like he might be a top 9 forward, but that ship has long sailed the last 3 or 4 years. It's pretty obvious he's not a top 9 player. And I get he's a veteran, he's reliable, you know what to expect from him, but yeah, he's not going to knock your boots off by any stretch of the imagination.
Now, since we have some more time and we've kind of gone through the topics that we were talking about, I kind of know the answer to this, but what's been impressive to you, at least the last couple games? Has anybody surprised you? Has anybody come out that you better than you thought they were?
No, I don't think anyone's surprised me. It was just good to see last game, the big guys start to come to the forefront. Meyer, Hurdle, nice to see LeBanc get involved. Actually, I'll let you take it because I know who you're thinking of, and I agree.
So the name I was going to throw is Gambrell.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really impressive play the last 2 games. I don't know what it was. I don't know what made him suddenly jump up, but getting some good PK time in too, which if he can do that, then he makes a place for himself on the team, I think. But the kid looked impressive, and I think that maybe that's what we need. We need a guy or a couple guys to decide they're going to step up and they're going to be, they're going to make the difference on the team. I hope that keeps up. I hope it's some sort of big light switch flicked in his head and he's figured it out and he's going to do it. But I figured he deserves a mention tonight. We haven't really talked about him. And
yeah, no, I totally spaced on that until you mentioned it. And he has been excellent especially last game. I thought was really, really good. He just looks so much more confident than he did to start the year. And the board talked about, they pretty much asked him that same question, what woke him up? And he said, well, I think it was the threat of him being sent down, which maybe there's some truth to that. But he just looks so much more confident. I don't know where the confidence came from. Maybe was getting a couple of assists in the Chicago game. But even on the power play, he looked really polished last game. Him and Carlson had some pretty good chemistry on the second unit. He kept feeding Carlson, and then Carlson would feed Jumbo, and Jumbo would refuse to shoot, and then Carlson finally said, fuck it, I'll shoot. And then Joe shoots and hits the post, of course. But
Jumbo didn't shoot when there was a stick stuck in the net. If he's not going to try to pass the stick in the back of the net, we're never going to get shots out of him.
Yeah. And then when he does shoot, he scores or hits the post. So
yeah. I agree. The other thing I think you never know with this kind of stuff unless someone comes out and says it, but maybe someone took him under their wing. Maybe someone said, hey, it's your turn to step up. You can do this. I don't know if that'd be Thornton or Marleau or somebody who's older there, but maybe someone just gave him a kick in the butt that wasn't the coach, right? It was a player telling them that, hey, we see more out of you. You can do more than this. So I figured let's end with this question from Steve. I don't know that I have an answer to his question, but I can babble about it for 4 minutes easily. So what's wrong with NorCal hockey? So it always seems like the Sharks don't have the killer instinct, right? They let other teams hang around in games. They never go for the kill. Vegas clearly has a killer instinct. I think they're actually one of all the teams in the NHL, they have one of the best killer instincts. They just seem to just pile on you when you're down. Why do the Sharks not have it? He's going to say every year. Let's just say this year or the last couple of years at least.
I think that's a look in the mirror type thing. I think everyone probably thinks that about their own team to an extent. It may be true to an extent with the Sharks, but I think that's a little bit of you're always more critical of your own team than when the shoe is on the other foot. I've always had this mental thing over the years where I've never seen the Sharks in a road game look as good as they do in home games. It's like they're impossible to play a good road hockey game or dominate like they do in some home games. And especially, 6-7 years ago when they used to just blow teams out of the building at home. And I really think it's just a mental thing of watching your own team and being overly critical. The other thing I could maybe attest it to is just all the playoff failures over the years. For the guys that have been here for a long time, that takes a toll on the mind mentally. And I think you sort of expect to fail in some situations when it comes to playoff time, when that's ultimately what they've experienced, for the 8 or 10 years that some guys have been here.
Yeah. And I would say that, I don't know, I wouldn't say they don't have a killer instinct. I would say that I think that, he brings up Vegas, and I think that's a good team to bring up. I think the problem is that in comparison to a team like Vegas, most teams don't have a killer instinct. When Vegas started 2 years ago, they came out with a chip on their shoulder. I think that's become a part of their team, and their style of play is they play like they have a chip on their shoulder all the time. Like they have something to prove. And I'm not surprised by that because it's basically a team of guys that their teams didn't want to protect them, right? It's literally a team of put together by taking guys from other teams where they were like, we don't need this guy anymore. If you want to draft him, go ahead and draft him. And so I think that to some extent, and all the way down to the goalie, right? I mean, Fleury, who when he was picked up, it's like, okay, nobody cares about losing Fleury, but then now he's one of the best goalies again in the NHL. So I think that part of it is just a comparison thing, Steve. I think when you see them play a team like Vegas, you feel like we don't have a killer instinct and Vegas does. But I think if you look around at least the West, nobody else really has that mentality and that attitude when they're out playing that I feel like Vegas does.
Well, I think Vegas just has a more talented team. I mean, that helps too, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
And, I mean, goaltending is a big part of that. I mean, if your goalie's a little vulnerable, then it's hard to put teams away. So, I don't know. I will say that I think the mental side of hockey is probably more important than any other sport. Like, I really do believe come playoff time, the team that wants it most typically wins. And I think St. Louis this past year was a great example of that. I mean, I don't think by any stretch of the imagination they were the most talented team. Obviously, I mean, look at Tampa Bay. They got knocked out in 4 games to a team that was far inferior to them. And certainly Columbus came in hot into the playoffs. But I really do think in hockey, I mean, belief and chemistry is more important than it is in any other sport, just because so much of hockey is about effort. Execution and skill certainly plays into it, but effort and, how hard you're working to win puck battles is such a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else you want to talk about? Edmonton is number 1. I don't know how that's happening, but
yeah, they finally lost last night. I don't remember who they played last night. Chicago they lost to. Like I was telling you, I don't see that lasting. I mean, you can throw out the first 5 games for pretty much every NHL team other than teams like Boston who we expect to be good and are already doing very well. But, I mean, hell, the team that I picked for my Eastern Conference Finals hasn't won a game yet, the New Jersey Devils. So that prediction looks great. Meanwhile, Colorado's undefeated. I should have went with them. But, yeah, I mean, it's early in the season. As much as us Sharks fans like to panic, I wouldn't read too much into anything positively or negatively. Although, if you want to be a bitter Sharks fan, you mentioned Pavelski. Dallas is 1-5-1 on the year. He has 1 point on the season. So far, despite our struggles, I don't know if you could argue that not keeping him was a bad idea.
Well, or at least that he made it. He definitely made me wondering about his choice. But
yeah. Other updates, Donskoy got 2 goals his first game. One of them was an empty net. Hasn't scored since then. And then Nyquist, I think, has 1 goal and 1 assist for Columbus. So.
All right. Well, that's your update on the rest of the league, or former Sharks players that haven't been re-signed to the Sharks. I guess we'll leave you guys with that. So thanks for joining us. It's been Sharks Talk 916, brought to you by Sports Talk 916. Check us out on Facebook on Sports Talk 916 Network and on Twitter at Sharks Talk 916. We tweet during most of the games unless we're at them or turn them off because of how horrible they're going. So check us out. And we should be back on here in, a couple weeks probably?
Yeah, we've been going about once every 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks of this season had way more to talk about than 2 weeks normally would. So we'll see how the next 2 weeks go.
Yeah. But, we put it on Twitter and Facebook when we're going to have a show, so you'll know a little bit ahead of time. And then you can always download us on Spotify or iTunes or whatever you like.
If you don't want to look at our faces, use that option.
Yeah, I recommend that option. And give us some sort of rating on there. Let us know how we're doing. Comments are always welcome. We'll, send you your money if you include an address with your 5-star rating.
Chad will send you his money.
It won't be
I'm not volunteering for that. So.
All right, guys. Have a good day.
See you.